The long shifts had dulled everything into sameness. The same faces, the same orders, the same tired jokes from regulars who kept coming back because the food tasted like home. Between trays, she scrolled through an auction site out of habit, the way some people scroll through social feeds, a reflex that never fully went away even though she had promised herself years ago to stop looking. It was a search she had made in secret for half a decade, a hope she could not stop carrying even when logic said it was gone. Then a photo appeared, blurred and grainy, a mare standing in a muddy pen with ribs showing through a dull, filthy coat, surrounded by other animals waiting in the long shadow before a truck. Even in the muck and ruin, the face was familiar. The eyes said the same thing they had said 1,000 times before. It was Luna, the gray mare who had been the center of everything that once felt safe. The horse the family had been forced to sell the year the bills arrived like a storm. The horse that had been taken away the day after a funeral when a 10-year-old had learned that sometimes adults choose survival over what a child loves most. For years the story had ended with a single brutal sentence, euthanized, a word that had lodged into Emily's chest and sat there like a smooth, impossible stone. She had believed for 5 years that Luna was gone forever, that the family's choice in grief had condemned the only creature who had ever understood a small girl's heart. Now, looking at the Lorez picture, Emily could not believe her eyes. Luna was alive. Alive and in a kill pen, hours away from a truck that would take her to death the next morning unless someone acted. The phone shook in Emily's hand as if it had a pulse of its own. She clicked back to the listing and dialed the number, and it rang once before a woman answered with a voice that had been flattened by repetition. "Willow Creek Livestock Auction," she recited. The voice had no color, just the same bored cadence one used when a conversation was purely transactional. Emily tried to ask the question that felt like the one chance between life and nothing. "Is she still there?" The woman checked, made a note of a lot number, and gave the answer that tightened Emily's breath into a small, painful knot. Lot 47, the dappled gray mare, still there and scheduled on the Monday truck. $300 cash to stop the kill buyer price. Sunday, 1:30 in the afternoon, 4 hours away by the strictest estimate. Emily opened her banking app with trembling fingers and watched the digits on her screen like an enemy. $247. That was all she had saved from a string of 60-hour weeks spent carrying plates and rinsing coffee pots, every bill earned with a backache or a smile forced for tips. $53 short. The tightness went sharp and cold across her ribs, a quiet, rising panic. Around her, the diner hummed with ordinary life. A man in a suit reading a paper, an old woman sipping coffee, a teenager laughing too loud into a phone. Behind the counter was Robert Chen, the manager who had given a scared 15-year-old girl a chance when no one else would hire someone so green. He hunched over the receipts, glasses perched on his nose, every line pulled tight with focus. Emily's legs felt unsteady as she walked up to him. She had no plan beyond one impossible hope. The words came out of her raw and quick. "Robert," she said, voice breaking, "I need to borrow $60. It's Luna. If she goes on the truck, she's gone." He looked up, saw the look on her face, and reached into his wallet without a question. 320s were handed over like an answer to a prayer. "You never ask," he told her, "and this isn't a loan. It's a gift, go." The drawer of the till still rang with the morning's receipts. Emily was in her old, battered sedan before she had time to shape a proper thank you. With the 320s added to everything else, she held 300 in her hand, cash pressed flat as paper, a fragile, urgent key. The GPS said 3 hours and 52 minutes if the speed limit was never exceeded. Emily did not drive the speed limit. For 4 hours, she kept a silent, private litany, a list of desperate hopes. Please let Luna still be there. Please let her remember. Please let this be enough to fix a wrong that had lived like a ghost inside for 7 years. The memory of the day Luna had been sold was one of the oldest pain in Emily's life, a scar that had refused to fade. She remembered with blinding detail, sitting at a small kitchen table 3 days after the funeral while her mother told her the house was lost, the horse boarding business was gone, the life insurance promise had never existed. The words bankruptcy and foreclosure had landed like thunder. They had to sell Luna, her mother said through tears. The bank would take everything if they didn't make the sale themselves. At the time, the decision had felt like a necessary cruelty. A man named Kyle Patterson had arrived the next day with full cash and no questions, offering $2,000 for Luna based on papers that proved her breeding. Jennifer took the money because the mortgage collectors were already knocking, and because rent and food and mortgage do not wait for grief to pass. Emily watched from the bedroom window as Kyle loaded Luna into a trailer. The mare called out then the way a herd animal does when being torn from its world, a sound that lodged itself into a child's bones. Emily had pressed her palms to the glass, tears trailing down her cheeks, because she had known that stepping outside would make Luna fight and would make everything worse. That had been the last time they had seen each other, or so everyone had believed. The Willow Creek auction was a maze of metal buildings, mud-slick pens, diesel and manure and sorrow. Parking lots held trailers and sunburned people. Small dog-eared signs nailed to posts promised early pickups and late lots, and a smell of resignation hung in the air like fog. Emily ran from her car and into the office, breath coming hard, chest tight. The same woman from the call sat at a cluttered desk eating a sandwich like this was any other day. When Emily said the words, the gray mare, lot 47, the dapple gray, the woman checked another thin clipboard and repeated the rule, 300 cash. Emily counted, hands shaking, each dollar a weight of time. They were made of hours and aches and the part of life that had been given up to keep food on the table and tuition in small installments. The receipt was signed with a pen that left a faint blue streak. Holding pen C, the woman said, and without measuring the question, asked if Emily had a trailer. The word fell like ice. No, there was no truck capable of towing, no trailer that could be borrowed for a few hours, and no more money left to rent one. That detail, the impossibility of moving a terrified 22-year-old mare out of a kill pen, might have been the end if not for a phone call she never thought she would make. Emily dialed her mother, the drum of her palms on the phone a rhythm of desperation. The two had not spoken much in months after a fight about university, about whether to stay in school when money had dried up, and the word quitter had been thrown like an accusation that flamed for months. The phone rang 3 times and then Jennifer's voice came, careful at first, then breaking into disbelief when Emily said Luna was in Willow Creek and alive. Don't let anyone touch her, Jennifer warned and promised to come. The arrival of Jennifer 2 hours later with a borrowed trailer felt like a miracle sobering into logistics. When Jennifer lifted the ramp, she found her daughter and the mare in a mud-filled pen that smelled like despair and too long neglect. Luna was older now, a geriatric mare by horse standards, her glossy coat of childhood gone dull and clotted with dried mud, her mane tangled with burrs and wire. Ribs showed across a frame that had once been sleek, and yet she held herself with a kind of stubborn, dignified pride. Her ears pricked at the sight of Emily as if she had only been waiting and listening. Emily climbed into the mud without thinking of the sign that said authorized personnel only. The other horses looked up with hollow interest that suggested the world had taught them not to hope. Luna, however, lifted her head and fixed Emily with the look that had been part of the child's dreams for 7 years. Emily approached with hands wide and voice low, words pouring out more for the speaker than the listener. Apologies, explanations, confessions of how she had felt guilty for years, how she had believed she had failed Luna, how she had never stopped searching. The mare held back like someone weighing whether to trust again, then made a small sound, a nicker, that meant recognition at a level that transcends speech. It was Luna's voice, the private greeting that had once been saved only for Emily. The sound broke something that had been held in the chest for years, and Emily collapsed to her knees in the mud, sobs racking the body that had been hardened by late shifts and quiet shame. Luna, trembling, came closer and lowered her muzzle to the girl, warm breath on wet hair, an offering of forgiveness or perhaps an acceptance. The reunion was quiet and terrible and miraculous, two broken lives acknowledging one another. That night, with mud drying on skin and the rainy weight of the whole day still clinging, they eased Luna up a ramp that seemed impossibly narrow. Putting her into the trailer took time and patience. She reared, she balked, she remembered trailers as the beginning of bad things. They used old tricks, calm voices, the memory of Emily's touch, and step by step she walked into the metal box that would take her away from the place where hope had been rationed. The highway home was long. The trailer made a steady roar and Emily sat inside beside Luna, cramped and anxious and entirely certain that being near was the only way to begin repairing what 7 years had bent. Jennifer drove with hands white on the wheel, mind racing with plans that collided with lack of space and lack of land. They had no stable to put Luna in. The old property was gone, sold off in the bankruptcy that had sliced their lives into before and after. The solution arrived like thunder in a phone call the next day after a few pictures and a few sentences were posted online. That simple post went further than expected, and people began to share a story that turned from a desperate plea into a ripple that reached someone with room and a heart. A woman who ran Clearwater Stables offered a stall at no charge, a place where Luna could sleep in straw and look out at green, not mud. A vet named Dr. Hassan confirmed the worst of it in clinical terms. Untreated laminitis, arthritis, severe underweight, rotting teeth that made eating agony, damage from ill-fitting tack and rough handling. Patricia, the owner of the facility, knew horses and had the kind of hands that had felt decades of animal pain and also the skills to fix what could be fixed. Donations came in from strangers who had been moved by a reunion between a girl and a horse, and within days money arrived to pay for medical care and feed. The physical changes happened gradually, the slow work of restoration, careful nutrition that packed pounds back onto bone, hoof care that stopped the everyday pain of walking, dental work that made food pleasurable rather than punishment. More profound, though, was the mental shift under the steady presence of touch that meant safety. Luna learned to put her head on a shoulder again, to stand without frayed edges of fear, to accept being led without flinching. Emily visited night after shifts at the diner. Sometimes she arrived after midnight and sat just so she could be a familiar voice and a warm hand. This intimacy was not the same as owning a horse that had been unbroken or easy. The mare had been passed from owner to owner, each one failing to understand her, each one resorting to harsher methods when Luna did not bend to what they wanted. The list of owners and reasons was a map of human failure. Bought for breeding, used as a lesson horse, sold to ranch hands, traded again and again until a trainer, frustrated by resistance that was more spirit than stubbornness, sold her to auction. The paper trail showed names and dates and the slow decline that comes from being a commodity. Yet Luna had never truly given herself away. She had not bonded with anyone else the way she had with Emily. She had not stopped listening for one voice. The reunion created its own kind of miracle, a slow, stubborn healing that reached beyond medicine into loyalty. As Luna grew more comfortable and gained healthy weight, a new kind of future pressed against the edges of what had seemed possible. Patricia, who had given the stall and steady skill without asking for thanks, began to imagine a succession plan. She was older, tired in a pleasant, honest way of waking before dawn to feed and clean, and take on the endless small problems that keep a stable running. She suggested something that sounded impossible: sell Clearwater Stables to the teenage girl who had been so single-minded in saving a mare. At first, the suggestion made everyone laugh because it was too large for the frame of a diner girl with community college classes and a bank account that tracked through $200 and change. But Patricia believed that stories change what is possible, and that the goodwill Luna's reunion had spawned could be shaped into something lasting. Emily's mother, who had once felt only the burn of losing a home and selling the one thing that had mattered to her daughter, surprised her by weeping in a different way. The old dream of building a place where horses were cared for had not died when the bank repossessed the land. It had merely been postponed. The idea of bringing back a version of that dream, this time under different hands and with a chance to do it right, reawakened something that had been cold for years. What followed was paperwork and meetings and a kind of improbable network knitting itself together. Bank officers moved by news articles and by little daughters who had cried over the reunion, small lenders offering unusual terms, whispers of community support, the local diner providing a recommendation that spoke of work ethic in ways that made a difference. A payment plan was arranged that let Patricia hand over the business slowly, mentoring the new owner through barn management, client relations, and the long, practical patience of running a stable. The deal itself was almost as unlikely as the reunion, structured so the teenage buyer could learn while paying, and so an older trainer could retire with confidence that her lifelong work would be left in patient hands. Life at Clearwater became a place of repair in more ways than one. Luna thrived with daily feeds balanced for her needs, with medication to ease arthritis and hoof care that prevented pain from becoming obsession. She put on weight until the harsh outlines softened into curves, and the mare that had been reduced to ribs and wounds looked like herself again. The relationship between the girl and the horse deepened into a reliable routine. Twice a day the mare would lift her head from her stall when the sound of footsteps came, the ears lifting and the soft nicker of greeting issuing like a signal that said everything: recognition, relief, the quiet contentment of being expected. The stable changed, too, into a place where others could be helped. Programs were started for rescue horses, reduced boarding fees for animals that needed time and an understanding hand, lessons offered to kids who might not otherwise get the chance to learn about riding and care. The name on the paperwork might have been the new owners, but the real work was shared by a community that had shown up in small and large ways after seeing what love looked like when it refused to surrender. There were setbacks. Luna had bad days when the old pain flared and she needed pharmaceuticals and time. There were nights worrying whether the financial plan would hold, whether small-town goodwill could replace the muscle of capital. But steady work and the daily presence of a familiar person made most problems manageable. The two grew into a rhythm where trust was exchanged for trust, and where the longest, largest promise, the one made by a small, stubborn girl in a kitchen years earlier, was finally being kept. In time, the stable prospered, not because of a miracle, but because people wanted to be part of something that proved something simple and profound. That dedication and compassion could be rebuilt into something practical. The story became a quiet legend locally, and the owner kept a framed newspaper article in an office that smelled like linseed and hay, less as a boast than as a reminder of how fragile hope can be and how tenacious people become when given a reason to try. On the third anniversary of the reunion, there was a small party at the barn with friends and clients who had been part of the long, slow healing. Balloons and cake seemed absurd and perfect at once. Luna was given treats and fuss and all the attention of people who had watched her story unfold. The mare leaned her head against the familiar shoulder as she had done in a muddy pen years before, the gesture a bridge over time that linked a girl's promise to a life rebuilt. The mother who had once felt guilt for selling the horse stood with flowers and watched the two of them. A mother and her child who had both, in different ways, learned how to keep a promise to someone else. A mentor who had stayed involved but stepped back into retirement spoke quietly about the memory of animals and how they carry things in ways that humans sometimes forget. Horses remember, she said, and the mare had remembered someone who mattered to her. The barn at dusk smelled of straw and evening air, and the sound of munching horses made a soft, reassuring backdrop to the scene. Standing in that light with the mare by her side and a community around her, the girl who had once stood at a kitchen window and watched Luna be loaded into a trailer felt a deep, steady completion. The wound that had been opened by loss had not been erased, but it had healed into something else. A life reassembled into a shape that honored the past and made room for the future. The story of the mare who had waited and the girl who had returned became something people told to one another, a reminder that loyalty can be measured not in immediate wins, but in persistence. It showed that sometimes second chances are slow and costly, but no less real. If this reunion touched the heart, there is a simple way to let the message travel. Tell it to someone who needs to be reminded that loss does not always mean finale, and that faith held steady over years can change lives. If this tale inspired a feeling of hope, please make it ripple by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more stories like this can reach people who need a reason to believe in stubborn love and patient promises. Support the channels that bring true second chances to light by tapping like, sharing with a friend who believes in unlikely reunions, and subscribing so more tales of rescue and dedication can find an audience.